Hi, Rasha.
Hello,
Rasha.
hi Bob.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You are Rasha Kamel, and you're joining us from Cairo.
Yes.
Where you are, among other things, a physician and a professor at the Cairo University Hospital.
Yes, that's
but
right.
More relevantly, perhaps, you have been part of the protest movement that led to the deposing of your former president, Morsi. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us, because I know things are still very active there.
Indeed they are, yes.
And in fact, I think even as we speak, there is the big, I don't know how big it is, but the pro-Morsi rally sponsored by the Muslim Brotherhood is taking place, or has taken place today. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, and there have been some minor clashes in front of the Republican Guard.
Yeah, I actually saw
They're
one
taking
report
place
of
right now. Yes.
I saw one report of a death. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but okay. So first of all, let me ask you: are you happy with the way things are proceeding so far in the wake of the transition, or has that met your expectations in terms of the way the new government is behaving, or what?
Yes, I am. We all are, actually. We're very happy with the way things are going right now. We're waiting in anticipation. We're hoping for the best, but right now we are.
Okay. There's been a big kind of argument over whether to call this a coup. In the United States, people are by and large, I think, tending to call it a coup. I gather that people who supported the transition there are not calling it a coup, because I guess that has some negative connotations, for one thing. Am I right that you don't consider it a coup?
No, I do not. I don't think all of us, the Egyptian people here, of course, except for the pro-Morsi supporters, we do not perceive this as a coup at all. If you want to measure the outcome, this is not a coup. If you want to measure the process in the terms of, yes, it was a military seize of power, yes, but then I think you're gonna have to call it a democratic coup, not just a coup. You can't it cannot be in the conventional framework of that this is a power-hungry military officers who just went to depose the current regime because they want to seize the rule themselves. It's not like that. This was support of the people's uprising. Actually, the military did not interfere or intervene except after 2 days of the people sitting out on the streets. And I really don't understand when the Western media choose to be oblivious or to ignore the elephant in the room. How can they just ignore the 22 million Egyptians who are out on the streets calling for him to step down?
Well, I think I guess the argument for calling it a coup is that, as you said, it was done by the military who forced him to step down, and there are lots of coups that have some degree of popular support, and of course, coups, the people who do them often say they're in the name of democracy, but you don't know yet how it's going to turn out in that regard, but there's often some degree of popular support. It's certainly true that this has more evident popular support than most of the things we call coups. On the other hand, I guess there's no kind of hard evidence as to what exact percentage of the Egyptian population is happy with what happened. But
the way coups go, you don't give a grace period of 48 hours. You don't talk. You don't urge to reach reconciliations. This is not the way coups go. If it's a coup, there has to be an element of surprise. There has to be martial laws. There has to be army enforcement all over the streets. That's not the way it is, because the army knows that this is what the people want.
But he has suspended the Constitution, right? And
yes, and this is exactly what he wanted.
Well, right, but that's kind of, I guess I'm not sure what the difference is between this and martial law. Wouldn't you agree that in the short term, at least, the policies are in some ways more repressive than they were under the old government? For example, not only have all the Muslim Brotherhood media outlets been shut down, but, Al Jazeera which may be, maybe pro-Muslim Brotherhood in some ways, but is a reputable news organization, and people from Al Jazeera have been arrested. Isn't that, that's pretty repressive, right? I mean, I assume you're hoping, well, you tell me, isn't that actually more repressive of media than what had been happening under Morsi, at least in the short term?
Well, exactly the same was happening under Morsi's rule. I mean, there were several journalists who were, brought in for interrogation. Some of them were arrested. There were channels that were shut down. There were people who were prevented from going on air for the same reason. I mean, during Morsi's rule of 1 year, there was more trials and more people brought in for questioning about the insulting the president and this sort of charges more than the 30 years of Mubarak's regime. And I do believe that all the people who have been captured, the reporters and the people on Al Jazeera and the other Islamist channels, they have been released. But the channels are still shut. Released
on bail. But the Al Jazeera people have been arrested and will be tried. And I kind of can't imagine what they would be tried for. What would be the charge? What is Al Jazeera guilty?
I cannot pretend to know exactly what the charges are, but I do know that. I'm talking about mainly the other Islamist channels, Al Hafiz and Al Nas, and this sort of channels. There were frank calls for hate and incitement of violence, and I personally think they had to be shut down. I mean, there are lots of people who are not that aware in this country. There are lots of minions who just follow you when you just go out loud and say the word Islam, when you just go out loud and say we have to follow God and the Prophet and those in command. I mean, this is the songs that they sing all the time when they're trying to collect minions and trying to collect people who follow them. And there were frank calls for violence and frank calls for incitement to violence, and we've all seen what's been going on.
Okay, although Morsi himself counseled against violence, and I think so did the spokesman for the Brotherhood, and they're of course in jail or somewhere, right?
Well, I'm sorry, in his last speech, he was not really against violence. He was actually indirectly threatening with violence, and all the supporters and all the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. On that stage, they have a stage where the pro-Morsi protesters are in Nasr City. If you have the videos from there, I'm sure you can dig them up on YouTube. There are frank calls of violence and frank calls of battles, and that they are ready to give in whatever number of martyrs they can. And isn't this call for violence?
Yeah, I actually listened to the televised Morsi speech, and I heard him say he would defend. He was willing to shed his blood. That's not the same as advocating violence. But my main point was actually that after the coup, he explicitly said on Twitter, no violence. But anyway, I guess one question I'm interested. Sorry,
what he says is one thing, and what's been going on the ground is another thing. I mean, right after that, we've seen the pro-Morsi people trying to attack people, and they, for God's sake, the Cairo University is sieged now. They're inside the university there, and they're holding their camps there, and there've been massive attacks on the neighborhoods from there.
Well, of course, the protesters had burned Muslim Brotherhood buildings. I don't think you'd say that was justification for locking up the leaders of the protest, right?
For locking up the leaders of the protest, or you mean of the Brotherhood?
No, I'm just saying. I don't want to carry this too far, but I guess the main question I'm interested in is, what are your hopes and expectations as to how the transition will proceed? I assume you hope that doing things like locking up people from Al Jazeera is just a temporary. Those kinds of things won't be required in the long run. There will be a transition to democracy. How fast do you expect things to proceed? For example, if there hasn't been an election in 6 months, will you start to worry that in fact the coup, or this transition has gone badly? What is your expectation?
Yes, if there should be a delay of that, of course we will all worry. But there has to be stability on the streets first. I mean, for the government to be able to proceed with whatever they want, there has to be stability on the street first. But we're there, we're watching, and we're not going to be, after February 2011, after President Mubarak had stepped down, we had the 1 year and a half of the rule of the SCAF, and it wasn't really very happy rule, and it was quite eventful. And this is the main concern of most of us. We do not want that repeated. But I believe, and most of us believe, that I think they learned from their mistakes, and they learned to take the side of the people. And I trust very much that they're not going to do that again, and they are not here to seize power. Actually, they are here to transfer power to the whoever is going to be democratically elected.
Okay, so you're referring to the period after the first revolution, when there was an extended period of rule by the military council,
yes.
SCAF or SCAF.
Supreme Council.
Now, are you comfortable with the arrangement now? I mean, there are a lot of people in the United States who assume that the new president is kind of a puppet, that the military is actually running the shots, and that the new president, who doesn't have a history in politics, of course, he's a jurist, he's a judge, is maybe not really in control. What is your sense of who's actually running things now?
Well, we all know that he's a transient president. We don't know who's going to be calling the shots. I mean, it's too premature to assume things. But he knows, and we all know, that he's here for just a few months, just to keep things going until there's going to be presidential elections and there's going to be parliamentary elections. But we just want the constitution to be drafted first. I mean, that was the mistake in the first place. This is all that we want to do.
Okay,
yes.
So there is an expectation that it's not as simple as just calling for new elections, that everyone agrees there has to be a new constitution first?
Yes. Yes, this is what we wanted, and this is what makes us all very happy. I mean, if Morsi's step down, or whatever you want to call it, would have ended in the SCAF again, assuming rule, we would have been very disappointed. But with that roadmap that they provided us, this is what's making us happy and making us very optimistic, because this is what we wanted. We wanted a temporary president until the constitution is drafted, and then we want the elections to run in process. This is the way it should have been, and this is the way we want it to be now.
And what are the main deficiencies of the old Constitution that you're hoping will be corrected in the new Constitution?
Well, it was not at all inclusive like ex-President Morsi had promised us to be. It was drafted mainly by his people, by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was not at all, they had no concern for the minorities. They had no concern. I think they were just trying to reinforce the Islamization of the country somehow. And we were all against that, and there were several calls for him to try and reconsider, but he just wouldn't listen. And even the constitution, the assembly that was drafting the constitution, the Constituent Assembly, there were lots of questions about the legality of such an assembly. And we all know what happened when there were trials trying to dissolve such an assembly. Pro-Morsi people went and besieged the Constitutional Court. It was ridiculous.
Right. Right. That was in November, I guess.
Yes.
So it sounds like the complaint is more about the process that led to the drafting of the Constitution than the Constitution itself, or is it the case that the Constitution itself has some kind of clear deficiencies that people agree need to be fixed, or it's more about the process?
It's both. It does have lots of deficiencies regarding women's rights, regarding minorities' rights, regarding Egypt turning out to be a secular country like we want it to be. This was all. There were lots of deficiencies regarding these points, and of course, like I told you, the Constituent Assembly itself. It was not at all inclusive. I mean, it was mainly brotherhood. Even there were some people who were there from other parties, and they just resigned. They just withdrew gradually, one by one, when they saw the way things were.
So was the old Constitution Islamist in the sense of explicitly grounding the law in Islamic law? I mean, actually, I think well before Morsi, there was some provision saying in the abstract that Islamic law is the ultimate basis, or Islamic values or something, the ultimate basis for law, I think, right? But
it's the principles, not the values. I mean, it's the principles, which is
right.
It's quite a vague term with no specific allocations.
So even the Constitution that was just suspended is not explicitly Islamist in the sense of saying Sharia is the basis for law.
No, I don't think it was explicitly said,
okay.
But they disregarded all other minorities. I mean, they disregarded any rights to the Copts, any rights to the Shiites, any rights to the Baha'is, any rights to any other religions. There were clear deficiencies to the rights of women, clear deficiencies to the rights of children, child labor, the family law, the laws of divorce, the laws of child custody, all these things. There were lots of deficiencies regarding these items.
Were these issues just kind of not covered? In other words, there wasn't explicit protection of the rights of religious minorities, and that's the concern. So you want more like a Bill of Rights kind of thing.
Absolutely. And actually, we were concerned as well because it gave the military lots of rights as well. We were not happy with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, as you said, very large gatherings were in support of this transition. And they were, I guess, somewhat diverse, drawing from, various parts of society. And, there's a good part of that. But then when it comes time to create the new government and elect a new president, the diversity could, in principle, prevent agreement on what exactly to do. Is there a concern that consensus is going to be hard to gain?
Of course, and this is the way we want it. We want it to be hard to gain, and we want to be lots of arguments, lots of discussions until the right thing is reached in the end.
Mm-hmm. But you're optimistic.
Yes, I am. I'm extremely optimistic. I'm just worried, of course, about the terroristic attacks that, just this morning there were terroristic attacks on Sinai. We're being threatened constantly that the Islamists, the jihadists are not going to sit silently about that and they're going to retaliate. Of course, we want security, we want stability, or else how will the government perform? Mm-hmm. This is the only thing that's worrying us. But at this point, we are not at all doubting the military's intention. And we do not, I repeat, we do not perceive this as a military coup. I think just the military backed what the people want, and we are very, very grateful for that. And for once, even the police force are on our side. This is something to record because usually there has been such a rift between us and the police force because they were always on the leader's side, on the president's side, or whoever is in charge. For once, they decided to ally with the people, and they decided to back the people. So for once, it's the army, it's the people, it's the police force. We're all in one unity. This has to be appreciated, and this tells you one thing, that this government was such a failure. There was no reason, and there was no way for us to wait until the next elections. I mean, he brought the country down the drain in 1 year. Were we supposed to just wait and see what will happen in the next 3 years? What we were supposed to do? I mean, I just don't understand. We're supposed to just wait and see until he consolidates more power for him and more power for Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, this is clearly what he's been doing all the time. Yeah. The more he would have stayed, the more he would have rooted the Brotherhood, the more it would have been extremely, extremely difficult for us to take him out.
And did the old Constitution have no means for kind of peaceful, unscheduled transition? So, in the United States, if a president, at least if he commits crimes, he can be impeached at any point in theory. Did the Egyptian Constitution have no measures for even like calling a referendum to call for early elections, or was there just no peaceful avenue available?
We've been calling for that, but he wouldn't listen. All the opposition leaders have called for that, and he wouldn't listen. I mean, the road for democratization has been absolutely blocked by him. So this is why I think the military had to intervene this way.
You mean they called for him to call for early elections, or they called for constitutional change that would permit peacefully coerced transitions? Or
Well, there couldn't have been changes in the constitution now. I mean, for the constitution to be changed, there has to be the parliament first. They're the ones with the right to call for changes in the constitution. And there were lots of problems with the laws that are going to take care of the elections for the parliament.
But did he have, this is a little technical, did Morsi have the legal authority to call for early elections? I read somewhere that he actually didn't.
Excuse me?
Did Morsi actually have the legal authority to call for early elections?
I'm not sure, but was he really strictly adherent to whatever he should do and whatever he should not do? I mean, we all saw the constitutional decree that he did in November 22nd, which he had no right to do, and he just stuck to it, and we all went down to the streets for him to try and withdraw it, but of course he was extremely stubborn and he wouldn't. Did he have the right to make his followers go and siege the constitutional court when they were ruling over the Constituent Assembly? Of course not. I mean, I can go for hours and hours on the illegal stuff that he permits himself to do.
Is it easy to kind of quickly list the other main grievances? So as we said, in November, Morsi kind of suspended the authority of the courts, which, you know, so far as I know, he didn't actually have the authority to do. I don't know, but and then as you said, he quickly kind of drafted his own constitution and did subject it to a referendum, but it wasn't, you know, an especially pluralistic way of arriving at a draft of a constitution. So there was that whole set of grievances. Now, since then, in the I don't know, 7 or 8 months since then, have additional kinds of complaints about Morsi's conduct crystallized, and if so, what are some of the other things that people were upset about?
Well, we were upset about him appointing the prosecutor general. He had no right to do that. He just went and gave himself that right, and when we all objected to that, he just wouldn't listen. It was clear what he was trying to do. All the ministers, all the people who are in important governmental positions are either right-out Brotherhood people or with the strongest affiliation to Brotherhood, regardless of their qualifications, regardless of how incompetent they were. And they were so incompetent. I mean, the economy floundered in 1 year. We're suddenly queuing for fuel. We're suddenly, the bread price has risen up. I mean, that was one of the principles of the first revolution. We wanted the government to provide bread. It was a complete failure. It was, I mean, their ineptitude was shocking.
And I gather a lot of it was economic. Is there a sense that he was just making kind of clear economic blunders, and there's kind of consensus on what needs to be done to correct the situation, or does it seem more complicated than that?
It's quite complicated, of course, but I mean, it was economic blunders. It was blunders on the platform of freedom of speech, freedom of expression of opinion. He assaulted the journalists. He assaulted even the satirical shows. He assaulted them, and he wanted to throw everybody in jail. The activists, a lot of activists are suddenly in jail. His attack on, I mean, it's like he was on a constant mission to try to change the identity of the country. He was attacking the culture. He was attacking the education. Suddenly, the French language is not a language to be taught in the curriculum of the schools anymore. It's an extracurricular activity. Suddenly, we hear that the ballet is haram. The new minister of culture was absolutely nothing to do with culture. He went and kicked out the manager of the Opera House, which was an extremely qualified manager with a doctorate from the Sorbonne University of France, to just replace her with somebody who was extremely incompetent and unqualified. I mean, and he would just, people would, would object, would try to draw attention to these things, and he would just be extremely stubborn about it. Even when he was appointing the governors, to go and appoint the governor of Luxor as one from the Jama'ah Islamiyya, the ones that were responsible for the massacre of tourists in Luxor itself. I mean, isn't this extremely provocative, or what? What is the message he's trying to send?
So how do things kind of feel right now? I mean, I know today in particular we're kind of waiting to see what the outcome of the first day, you might say, of really, demonstrated backlash, I guess. But at the moment, what's your sense of where things are?
Well, I'm telling you, it's hard to predict, but I think there's going to be instability for a couple of days. But I have faith that the army and the police force are going to be able to control things and to contain things somehow. And then we're going to just wait and see the reforms that we've been waiting to see for such a long time. And we are all anticipating to see who's going to be the prime minister of that transitional government. Be it Al-Baradi or be it anybody else who's nominated, it's going to. This is going to be a clear indicator of how serious they are on their plans of reform. If they're competent enough and if the environment in the country around them is stable enough to give them the chance to act, then I'm quite optimistic. And and of course we need the support from US, from Europe. This is a tough time for us. If they're willing to understand and to hear our voice and to give us their support, then that's going to be really appreciated. But if they are not, and if they keep insisting to call this a coup, and I'm talking about the U.S. now, if the U.S. keeps insisting to waive the threat that the congressionally mandated holding of the military aid because this is a coup, fine, if you want to withhold the military aid, fine. But that was part of one of the items of the Camp David Accord. Then I guess we're going to have the right to revise the other items as well ourselves. We're just. I think that if the U.S. is going to just have a general overview of what was going on, I think they're going to side with the Egyptian people also for a change. And frankly, I'm sure you're aware of it. I'm sure all of the United States citizens are aware of it. The sentiment, the anti-US sentiment has been on the rise here in Egypt. Yeah. And I personally do not expect the US to apologize to us Egyptians for their support to Mubarak, for their support to Morsi, even if it was a silent support, but it was still a support. They did not criticize any of his stark actions against democracy. They're providing the tear gas that they were bombarding us with during the protests. But at least as a token, they should just go and withdraw Mrs. Pattison, the ambassador, and try to send us an ambassador who can really relate to us, who cannot be that alienated.
Mm-hmm. How would you feel? I think the issue of funding for Egypt will not come up for another 6 months. How would you feel if the United States imposed conditions, said something like, funding will depend on Egypt having a new constitution and elections within 6 months or something like that? Would you think that something like that could actually be an aid in making sure that the military doesn't go too far here, or would you not welcome? And how do you think that in general the people who supported the protest movement would feel about a condition like that?
I think we would consider that as an ultimatum, and we will not really appreciate that. We ourselves, we do not want lots of time wasted during this transitional period. And as I told you earlier during this interview, if 6 months would elapse without any signs of anything happening, we will start to worry ourselves. And we again are going to take to the streets ourselves. But in the form of ultimatums, we don't really appreciate that. Like I told you, we need your understanding, we need your support, but we do not need your threats and we do not need your ultimatums.
Okay. Are you concerned about the precedent set by military intervention? Regardless of whether you want to call it a coup. There's been some talk of Egypt now following what used to be the Turkish model. In other words, you do have true elections, but if the outcome isn't, ultimately considered satisfactory by the military steps in and they, is that a concern that this could become a pattern in an unhealthy way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they did not really step in to control the results of elections. I mean, the results of elections are the ones that brought us a majority of Islamists in the parliament, and they're the ones who brought us Morsi. And many of us were not happy with those results, and we all waited to see how they're going to perform. They did not intervene until we took to the streets, until there were over 22 million Egyptians on the streets calling for action. It's not really about the results of elections, it's about what the people want.
Right. What I actually meant was in Turkey, I mean, you would have the elections, you would have the new government would govern for a while, and then if it wasn't satisfactory to the military would step in. I don't mean they manipulated the results, but you're not...
I'm not talking about them manipulating the results. I said that they stepped in when the people, took to the streets. They did not step in because it was unsatisfactory for them. The situation was unsatisfactory for us, for the Egyptian people.
Okay. So what, do you feel that the role of the protest movement for the time being is kind of over and it's now you wait and see, or are ongoing protests in support of the transition an important thing now? And what are you doing? I mean, are you kind of done with protesting for a while and going back to work, or what?
No, I mean, as long as our presence on the street is needed, then we have to. I mean, we have to show the military, that we have to show the international media, we have to show everyone that we are in support of what happened. And until everything quiets down, I mean, until all those threats by the pro-Morsi people, all the threats of violence and all the threats of protests, then we need to be out on the streets and make a clear statement that we are happy with what happened, that we are in full support of this new roadmap, and that we are trying as much as possible to make it come into effect.
Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Well, sorry, it's something wrong with the camera here. Well, I want to reiterate that we do not perceive this as a military coup. A military coup is if they had went to acquire the rule for themselves, regardless of the people's will. This is not the case. They just stood by the people. If you want to name it or to define it technically according to legal terms, then this is a democratic coup d'etat, which is something that in the end, and the outcome of it would be fair elections between civilian leaders, the transfer of power to this democratically elected leader. This is the way it had to be because there was some sort of authoritarian rule, and that authoritarian rule did not respond to the uprising of the people and did not respond to the urges by the military. They gave him a grace period, but he would not respond. He was extremely stubborn, and he was just relying on whatever support he can get. So we are actually happy with the way things are right now. We are not going to be totally blind to the possibilities. We are going to stay here with open eyes, and we are going to just hope for the best. Okay.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time when you've got so much else to pay attention to over there, and good luck to the whole country.
Well, thank you for trying to make our voices heard internationally. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.